And what are we to say of man? Is he a speck of dust crawling helplessly on a small, unimportant planet, as the astronomers might see it? Or is he, as the chemist might hold, a sea of chemicals cunningly put together? Or finally, is man what he appears to Hamlet, noble in reason, infinite in faculty? Is man perhaps all of these at once? That's a quote from Bertrand Russell, and it was the first philosophy book that I had read. I had read it when I was 13 or 14. It was written in 1959. And I began reading philosophy after studying political science at 13. My brother was in Vietnam on the front lines of the Marine Corps, and I got my hands on everything I could find about the war, and that led me on to reading other stuff about political science, and that led me on to reading philosophy and then stuff about religion. And so the big questions that I introduced this video with, what is man, and what is his place in the universe, and how do we find any kind of meaning? Those are the kinds of questions that I was asking myself as a young teenager. I became a Christian at 15, and at that point I looked for ways to understand why that would be a reasonable or the most reasonable viewpoint I could find. And so, as I said, I spent a lot of time not only reading philosophy, but a lot of time reading theology. I have called this series of videos Incognito Theology because I believe that much of Christian theology is hidden in plain sight, frankly, and much of it you need to kind of dig for, and so I want to spend some time talking about the kinds of things that I've learned over the years. After high school, I went to a Bible college where I received a bachelor's degree in biblical studies and general education. And then I went on and received 3 seminary degrees, one in counseling psychology, which is primarily how I make my living. I'm a psychotherapist in Bellingham, Washington. And I specialize in trying to help folks better understand their struggles from a Christian perspective. I have also got a graduate degree in divinity and exegetical theology, and I studied exegetical theology as a way of focusing on the original languages of Greek and Hebrew that the Scripture is written in, and trying to develop a coherent theology that would be helpful not only in my counseling work, but in my everyday life. And so I've spent a lot of time, many decades, studying the answers to the big questions. And I would like to spend some time sharing some of the things that I have learned. Before I go on to the nuances of Christian theology, I would like to spend a few videos, maybe 7 to 10, talking about the reasons for believing in a Christian worldview. So I want to spend this time briefly going over some of the arguments for the existence of God and answering the big question that is, what is our world made of? Is there a God that lives alongside the physical universe? And if there is, what form is that God? What is that God like? Or maybe there are many gods, as some religions hold to. And as I said, I plan on doing maybe 7 to 10 brief videos, maybe 10, 15 minutes a piece, going over the arguments for the existence of a personal, rational, infinite God. And when you think about it, there really are only 2 ways of looking at the world. One is a closed system, what the scientists might or philosophers would call a closed system. And that's a system where all you have is what we can examine with our five senses through the physical laws of nature. And so there is nothing else besides physical laws. There is nothing else besides what we can examine and what we can study and what we can scientifically try to explain, and we do that according to the known physical laws of nature. And so that's what you would consider to be a closed system, a system based on pure naturalism. And then you've got an open system, which is a supernatural force or a supernatural being that exists alongside physical laws, and the physical laws may be influenced by them. And so you've got the two ways of looking at the world, and I would first like to spend a few minutes talking about naturalism, and then get into some of the supernatural views, once again briefly, and then go into specific arguments to support the Christian worldview. And so that's where I plan on going. Actually, before I get into some of the specifics of where we're going, I need to add a disclaimer. What I'm talking about here are very complicated arguments, and what I'm talking about here are often debated questions about what religions are viable, what aren't. The existence of God has been argued forever, and what form God takes. And so I am attempting to take the 50,000-foot view of it all. I'm attempting to break it down into simply understood ideas that we can compare one with another. But the disclaimer is that my hope is this will lead folks to further study, because there is no way that I can get into what actually needs to be covered in such a complicated discussion as what I am attempting to do. So my hope is that this will lead to questions that people will end up looking into on their own. But in the meantime, I would like to just go over some of the simpler, as I said, 50,000 feet views of the different ideas, the different worldviews that we have available. So we've gone over the closed system, that is physical laws is all that we really have in the universe, and then the open system, where alongside the physical laws, you have supernatural laws, or you have supernatural influences. You have the existence of God or supernatural forces that have an ability to influence the physical world. And so those are the two primary questions in which everything else kind of fits into. Before I go into the supernatural worldviews, I would like to spend a few minutes on naturalism, and in particular the implications of naturalism. That is, if all that we have is what we can examine in the universe, is all that we have is the physical laws, then we are left with the conclusion that man is the highest authority for morals and values. There is no other authority, and we will talk about this in more detail in further videos. But if all we have is our physical world, then we get to decide what the morals and values are. We don't have a God, or we don't have a supernatural force determining what is right and wrong, or what is important. We just have us. And so that's one of the implications behind naturalism. Another one is life is temporary and physical death is permanent. So all that we have is our 70, 80, 90 maybe years on this planet, and then that's the end of it. And so that's something that we need to take into consideration as we are thinking about what is the most viable way to look at our view or view our existence. Another thing that we need to understand in regards to naturalism's implications is that something came from nothing. In the past, the assumption for those who held to naturalism was that the universe must be eternal. It must have always existed. Because in our experience, we have never seen anything come from nothing. And so that was the understanding. And then with the Big Bang theory, which most physical scientists have adopted, we have instead an understanding that something did come from nothing. And it all came about as a result of a huge explosion, a huge Big Bang, but before that, we must have had nothing. So that's another implication of naturalism. And finally, everything that exists is a product of natural laws plus time plus chance. So somewhere in the primordial universal soup, somehow, in some way, chemicals or atoms collided, got together in some way to produce everything that we see and we experience, including, of course, human beings and our ability to reason, our ability to examine the naturalistic sciences. So those are the primary implications of naturalism. And I love this quote from George Gaylord Simpson in The Meaning of Evolution. I forgot exactly what the date of the work was. But he is a naturalistic evolutionist. Was pretty famous, actually, in the 50s and 60s. And this is what he says. It is assumed that the material universe exists and that it corresponds with our perceptions of it. The existence of absolute truth is taken for granted, as well as the approximation of this truth to the results of repeated observation and experimentation. That such assumptions are debatable is evident from the violence with which they have been debated at various times. In practice, however, we all have to take it either that they are true or that we necessarily proceed as if they were true. Otherwise, there is no meaning in science or in any knowledge or in life itself. And I love this quote because it is the natural conclusion of naturalism, of the fact that we are alone with the physical laws of the universe in this world. And what he is saying is that even though we can gain no evidence of the fact that our perceptions are in any way correspond to what we consider to be reality, we can't examine that. We just need to kind of believe it by faith. And if we don't do that, then we have no meaning, and we have no reason for science, and we have no reason to understand that our reason corresponds at all with what we perceive to be the case. And so those are some of the limitations of naturalism. philosophy for a long time tried to understand the world and gain meaning of life and values and what was really true from what we could observe. And ultimately that endeavor ended with Nietzsche's proclamation that that God does not exist and that life is meaningless. And so the existentialists actually took it up from there, like Sartre and Heidegger, who said, and Kierkegaard actually was a religious existentialist, who said that even though we cannot, from our scientific examination, come up with an absolute truth or any meaning in life, we have to proceed as if that really is the case. And so existentialism provides what we might call a leap of faith. Sartre said that we validate our existence by acting. And it's not really important for him exactly what it is that we do in our actions, whether we help a lady across the street or whether we beat her over the head is really not important in terms of validating our existence. And so that's really where philosophy kind of went off the rails in terms of leaving the attempt of trying to accumulate evidence for absolute truths and for absolute meaning, and went into the realm of instead faith, and the kind of faith that George Gaylord Simpson in The Meaning of Evolution is talking about. Though there may not be any reason to believe that there's an actual truth or there's an actual meaning to this life, we have to proceed as if there is. Otherwise, our scientific examinations end up being useless because we have not established through the five senses that our scientific examinations have any coherence whatsoever with reality. So those are some of the limitations of the naturalistic worldview that I see, and some of the implications of the naturalistic view that I find to be fairly untenable. But what I would like to do in the next video series is to go over these supernatural worldviews and try to get down to which one of those worldviews makes the most sense. And as we do that, we will be talking about some more limitations to the naturalistic worldview. So we will discuss this further down the road. Thank you.